Before you decide that one slap tells you everything about a marriage, answer one question. What is a woman supposed to do when her husband spends years hiding behind quiet work, then appears beside the most important people in her life wearing the same tired jacket and the same empty expression? I was not laughing because I enjoyed seeing him hurt. I laughed because my boss had finally said, with one open hand, what I had been trying to make my husband understand for years. Elias rubbed the seam of his left cuff, calm as ever, while half the ballroom stared at the mark on his cheek. To me, that calm proved the loser had finally learned where he belonged. By the closing speech, every person in that room would know which of us deserved the stage. By 36, people at Arden Row knew me as Sloane Barrett, the woman who could place the right person beside the right glass of wine and make a business deal feel like friendship. I directed strategic partnerships for a hospitality development company in Seattle. My work was not sales, exactly. Sales asked for money. I made people feel important enough to offer it. Of course, importance had rules. A room decided who mattered before the first speech. It looked at shoes, posture, names on cards, and who waited for whom. I understood those decisions because I had spent my childhood watching my parents lose them. My father owned a printing shop until I was 14. When it failed, people who once called him talented began calling him decent. Decent meant they felt sorry for him. My mother never forgave the word. She taught me that private goodness could not protect a person from public pity. Elias knew that story. He knew why I counted chairs before meetings and checked guest lists twice. He also knew why promotions mattered to me. The problem was that knowing something and responding to it were different skills, and my husband was much better at the first. We had been married for 9 years and together for 12. He ran a small building systems company called Keystone Civic Systems. 11 employees. A plain office above a flooring warehouse. No receptionist, no polished lobby, and no photographs of him shaking hands with important people. He was good at what he did. I never denied that. If a hotel had smoke control problems, failing ventilation, or an energy system nobody else could understand, Elias found the fault. Then he explained it with drawings that looked like boxes connected by patient lines. At home, he loved in the same way. When my mother needed a safer shower, he installed the rails before she asked. When I prepared for my first board presentation, he rebuilt our spare room lighting so I could practice without a shadow crossing my face. On the night I received my director title, he waited outside the office with hot noodles because every restaurant had closed. I still remember eating from the carton in his truck while rain hit the roof. He kept rubbing the seam of his cuff before asking whether I was happy. That habit always appeared when he wanted to say something emotional and could not find a practical shape for it. I told him I was happy. He kissed my forehead and drove us home. Years later, that memory had become part of the problem. Elias could repair the lighting. He could remember the noodles. He could not stand in a crowded room and make people understand why his wife deserved to be seen. Damien Cross could. Damien was 45 and led Arden Row's Pacific Division. He wore dark suits even when everyone else wore summer linen. He remembered donors' children, investors' favorite tables, and the exact amount of praise needed to make a person work through a weekend. He had been preparing me for vice president for almost a year. Not officially. Men like Damien rarely placed promises where other people could measure them. He gave me the Orchard Quay account, let me lead executive dinners, and began introducing me as the future of Arden Row. Future. That word did more for me than all of Elias's quiet care. The week before our annual partner summit, 2 boxes of printed programs arrived at our apartment because I did not trust the office mailroom. The covers were cream with a narrow gold line. Arden Row Partners Weekend. Harcourt Glasshouse. 3 days. One announcement that I believed would change my title. Elias found me checking the programs on the living room floor. He picked one up and read the sponsor page. His thumb moved along his cuff before he asked whether the Orchard Quay renewal would be announced during the closing address. I said Damien had not confirmed the final order. He asked whether I had read the last page. I told him I had written half the program and did not need help reviewing my own event. That was not completely true. Communications had finished the speaker pages after Damien changed them twice. Elias turned to the back, looked at it for a moment, and closed the program. I thought he was checking whether Keystone's logo appeared among the technical partners. It did. Small, near the bottom, between a lighting supplier and a company that rented service elevators. I had arranged that placement myself because I believed giving him any larger space would look like favoritism. 2 boxes, 400 programs, one husband searching for his small logo. Of course, I found it sad rather than important. Damien's attention had started as professional. That is still how I describe it. There was no secret hotel room and no physical affair. What existed between us was harder to explain because it could hide inside every ordinary workday. He sent messages after meetings to say I had controlled the room. He asked which dress I planned to wear before investor dinners. When I disagreed with him, he argued instead of going silent. He made ambition feel attractive. Elias made it feel expensive. Orchard Quay had nearly collapsed as a project 6 months earlier. The waterfront hotel was supposed to become Arden Rowe's flagship property, but its building controls failed 2 inspections. Damien blamed contractors. Contractors blamed the original design. Investors began asking whether the opening date was fiction. I introduced Keystone because Elias had solved similar failures. His team worked nights for 8 weeks. He came home smelling of metal dust and cold air, placed his drawings on the dining table, and answered questions with single sentences. When the system finally passed, Damien praised me for finding a solution. I accepted the praise because I had found it. Elias said the credit should include his team. I told him technical teams did not expect applause. They expected invoices to be paid. He rubbed his cuff and asked if that was how I saw his work. What he meant was simple. Did I respect him? What I heard was more familiar. Would I reduce my own achievement to make him comfortable? I told him marriage did not require me to carry his ego into my office. After that, he stopped asking how Damien described Orchard Quay. Damien described it as his rescue plan. At first, the wording bothered me. Then he said senior leadership was about turning scattered expertise into one decision. Elias had supplied expertise. Damien had made the decision. I had connected them. Everyone had a place. Place was one of Damien's favorite words. He used it when assistants spoke too long. He used it when suppliers asked to sit near executives. He used it about Elias after meeting him at a project walkthrough. My husband had arrived in work boots because he came directly from the mechanical floor. Damien watched him wipe dust from the table before opening his plans. Later, he asked why a woman like me had married a man who looked grateful to be allowed indoors. I should have corrected him. Instead, I said Elias was useful when something broke. Damien laughed and said every organization needed people who understood their place. The sentence matched the bruise I already carried. That is why it stayed. Maren Cole, our communications manager, heard most of those comments. She was 32 and treated powerful people like warm buildings in winter. She did not love Damien. She loved being close enough to his approval that other people noticed. When I told her Elias would attend the partner summit, she asked whether he owned a suit that did not come with reflective tape. I laughed. Then she helped me move Keystone's logo lower on the sponsor page because Damien wanted the main space for firms with recognizable names. Elias saw the final program 2 days later. He asked why Keystone had been moved. I said sponsor size reflected contribution. He named the 8 weeks his team had spent at Orchard Quay. He named the emergency redesign and the 3 systems Arden Rowe now planned to use in every future property. His voice stayed factual. That was his flaw. Even when speaking about something that mattered, he sounded like a man reading maintenance notes. I told him effort was not the same as status. His thumb found the cuff seam. He asked whether Damien believed that too. I said Damien understood business better than either of us understood public feelings. Elias looked at me for a long second, then placed the program beneath his keys. The next morning, he said he would attend all 3 days of the summit, not only the welcome reception. I assumed he wanted to protect his logo. The Harcourt glasshouse stood above the water with steel ribs and high windows that turned sunset into copper. Arden Row had restored it as a conference venue. I had spent 4 months choosing everything from the stage fabric to the scent in the washrooms. During the final venue walk, Elias came with me because one of the smoke doors had started closing too slowly. I disliked having him there. He wore a grey work jacket beside my navy dress and carried a tool case through a room prepared for investors. The venue's technical director, Luis Ortega, met us near the stage. He shook Elias's hand with both of his and said the new control sequence had worked perfectly during the fire drill. He added that the glasshouse team still used Elias's diagrams. I told Luis my husband enjoyed being remembered for repairs. Luis stopped smiling. Elias did not correct me. He rubbed his cuff once, then asked Luis whether the closing microphone had been moved away from the air curtain. Luis said it had been moved exactly as requested. That detail did not fit my picture of Elias as a minor sponsor, but I explained it easily. Engineers always interfered with stages because machines were safer than people. Damien arrived during the sound check. He looked at Elias's jacket, then at the stage, and asked whether maintenance had joined the speaker rehearsal. I laughed before Elias could answer. Elias told Damien he was there as my husband and as a partner on Orchard Quay. Damien said partner was a generous word for a subcontractor. The room became careful. Luis looked toward me. Marin pretended to check the printed schedule. I could have ended the exchange with one accurate sentence about Keystone's work. Instead, I told Elias not to make my event about titles. He asked softly what had changed between the night we ate noodles in his truck and the day I became embarrassed by his jacket. The question was private. Damien's presence made it feel like an accusation. I said success had changed, and Elias had chosen not to change with it. Damien placed a hand on my shoulder. The gesture was small, but Elias watched it. His fingers pressed the cuff seam flat. Marin later told me I had handled the moment well. She said Damien needed to know I could separate marriage from leadership. Her approval warmed me because it sounded like strategy, not cruelty. That afternoon, I made my first deliberate omission. I removed Elias's company description from the media briefing and left only the logo. If reporters asked, Keystone would be called one of several technical vendors. I told myself the shorter wording protected both of us from accusations of favoritism. Damien read the revised page and called it clean. At home, Elias asked whether I had changed the brief. I said communications had tightened it. He asked if communications had also described Damien's Orchard Quay plan as an original internal system. I told him executive summaries simplified messy work. Then I asked why he cared so much about public credit when he always claimed not to care about attention. He said there was a difference between avoiding attention and allowing someone else to own your name. That sentence followed me into the bedroom. For several minutes, I nearly returned the description. My laptop was open. The original paragraph remained in revision history. Elias stood in the hallway without pushing me. There was the door. Then Damien sent a message saying the board had approved a private conversation about my promotion after the closing speech. I read the message twice and closed the document without changing it. Of course, timing matters. The welcome reception began Friday under warm hanging lights. 400 programs lay on cream chairs. The stage faced the water, and the skyline reflected in every glass wall. I wore silver because Damien once said silver looked decisive on me. Elias wore a dark suit I had forgotten he owned. It fit well, though the cuffs were slightly worn. He carried one folded program in his inside pocket. Marin met us at registration and pinned a gold ribbon to my badge. Her own badge read communications. Elias's simply said partner guest. I had chosen that wording. He looked at it, rubbed his cuff, and asked whether his company had separate credentials. I said technical vendors entered through the service desk. His face changed only around the mouth. Real sadness is not dramatic. Sometimes it is one breath a person decides not to use. He thanked the volunteer and put on the guest badge. Damien arrived with 3 investors and a photographer. He kissed the air beside my cheek, praised the room, and asked why Elias looked as if he had come to inspect the vents. I said inspection was the closest my husband came to celebration. The investors smiled because Damien smiled. Elias asked me quietly whether I wanted him beside me for the reception. What he meant was whether I still saw him as my husband in that room. What I heard was a request to manage his insecurity before my biggest weekend. I told him I wanted him to avoid creating tension. He nodded and moved toward Lewis near the technical booth. For the first hour, everything worked. Champagne moved. The quartet played. Damien introduced me to 2 board members as the person who would lead Arden Rowe's next expansion. Each introduction felt like a door opening. Elias remained near the edge of the room. Lewis brought him water. A woman I knew only as Annika Rao, chair of Arden Rowe's investment committee, stopped to speak with him. She touched his arm in the familiar way older executives used with people they trusted. I assumed she remembered him from Orchard Quay. At 8, the servers began clearing small plates. Damien had been drinking bourbon. Not enough to lose control. Enough to enjoy showing it. He called Elias over and handed him an empty glass. Elias looked at the glass but did not take it. Damien asked whether the service bar had closed. Elias said he did not know because he was a guest. Damien glanced at the badge I had chosen. Partner guest. Then he asked whether a man who repaired vents had become too important to carry one glass. People nearby heard him. Marin did. Lewis did. 2 investors turned from the windows. The photographer lowered his camera, then raised it again when Damien stepped closer. I moved between them, but not to protect Elias. I told him to take the glass and stop making a simple request difficult. Elias looked at me. His thumb moved once along the seam of his cuff. He said Damien could ask a server without insulting one. Damien's smile tightened. He asked me whether Elias always performed dignity after living on my success. The unfairness was obvious. Elias had never lived on my income. Still, half the room knew me, and almost nobody knew him. In that moment, public truth felt stronger than private fact. I said Elias had a talent for looking important while other people carried him. Marin made one quick sound of laughter. Nobody followed her. Damien held the empty glass against Elias's chest. Elias took one step back, not afraid, only refusing the contact. Damien asked whether he understood how many people in that room depended on Arden Rowe. Elias said more depended on the buildings working after the photographs ended. That sentence reached Damien where pride lived. The slap happened fast enough to surprise the room and slow enough to remain inside it. Damien lifted his right hand. His palm struck Elias across the left cheek. A flat sound moved beneath the music. Elias's head turned. One eye closed. The empty glass dropped onto the carpet and rolled without breaking. Nobody laughed. Damien kept his palm against Elias's face for a fraction of a second, pushing as if he wanted the photograph to show rank, not anger. Then he pulled away and looked pleased with the silence he had created. Elias straightened. A red shape was already rising along his cheek. He looked at me. There were many things I could have done. I could have called security. I could have checked his face. I could have said the plain sentence every person was waiting to hear. Instead, I laughed. It came out too loud. A bright, ugly sound. Once it started, I used it. I told the room Damien had only made visible what everyone already understood. I said this loser spent his life hiding behind small jobs and quiet complaints. I said a man who refused one harmless request needed to learn where his place was. The photographer captured my mouth open beside Damien's smile. Lewis stepped toward Elias. Annika Rao did too. Elias raised one hand, not at Damien, but to stop them. Then he rubbed the seam of his cuff. Slowly. Once. He bent and picked up the fallen program near his shoe. The cover had creased. He opened it to the last page, folded it inward, and placed it inside his jacket. I read the movement as retreat. Paper instead of courage. Order instead of a spine. Elias asked Damien whether the closing address was still scheduled for Sunday. Damien laughed and said Elias would be lucky to enter the building on Sunday. Elias looked at me once more. He asked whether I agreed. I said the summit belonged to Arden Rowe, not to subcontractors with wounded pride. His expression became calm in the way I knew best. No argument, no demand, nothing I had to answer. He walked toward the glass doors. Lewis followed him. Annika remained for 1 second, looking at me as if she needed to confirm that I had chosen every word without help. Then she followed too. The quartet resumed because musicians are paid to rescue rooms. Damien picked up another drink. Marin touched my elbow and said we needed to control the story before guests created one. I believed that meant the room still belonged to me. By midnight, 3 versions of the slap were moving through private messages. The official photographer had not posted anything, but guests had phones. One image showed Damien's palm against Elias's cheek. Another showed me laughing beside them. Marin drafted a short statement calling the event a misunderstood personal exchange. I changed personal to playful. Damien approved it. Elias did not come home. He sent one message saying he was staying at the Harbour Hotel and would attend the remaining summit sessions already on his schedule. Already on his schedule. I read the phrase as a threat to embarrass me further. Saturday morning, our apartment smelled of coffee he had not made. His grey work jacket was gone from the hook. The spare key remained in the bowl. I touched it, counted 2 mugs beside the sink, and left for the glass house before 7. At the venue, staff spoke more softly around me. The registration volunteer replaced the remaining partner guest badges without meeting my eyes. Lewis was not at the technical booth. His assistant said he was helping Mr. Barrett prepare upstairs. I asked what Elias could possibly be preparing. The assistant said only that the closing setup had changed. Of course, engineers always made simple things sound important. Damien arrived late and angry. He said the board had asked for a private account of the reception. He wanted me to confirm that Elias had provoked him and moved aggressively first. I said Elias had stepped back. Damien reminded me that my promotion conversation depended on leadership seeing judgment under pressure. He said nobody promoted a woman who let a bitter husband damage the company because she became sentimental overnight. There it was. The register he always used with me. Not tenderness. Not desire. Selection. I agreed to support the statement. Marin read my draft and removed one sentence claiming Elias raised his hand. She said too many people had seen the opposite. Her voice was no longer excited. She suggested we describe him as verbally confrontational. I asked whether she was protecting him. She said she was protecting language that could survive witnesses. At noon, I found Elias in a narrow rehearsal corridor behind the stage. He wore a white shirt with no tie. The mark on his cheek had darkened near the cheekbone. Nothing was broken. He did not offer me the relief of looking ruined. Annika Rao stood beside him with a tablet. She asked him whether the closing address remained his or whether he preferred her to read the prepared note. Elias said he would speak for himself. The words were clear. The meaning stood directly in front of me. For one thin second, the corridor looked different. The program. The microphone moved away from the air curtain. Lewis thanking him. Annika using his first name. Elias asking about Sunday before Damien touched him. I almost asked the only useful question. Then I saw his worn cuff beside Annika's expensive watch and closed the door in my own mind. She was offering him a victim's moment. A short statement about workplace respect. Nothing more. I told Annika that a domestic disagreement should not enter the closing program. She asked whether I considered an executive striking an invited guest a domestic disagreement. My answer did not arrive cleanly, so I turned to Elias. I said if he wanted to save our marriage, he would leave my professional life alone until we could speak privately. He rubbed his cuff. Then he asked whether saving the marriage required accepting my public description of him. I said he knew Damien represented years of work for me. I said one slap did not erase the way Elias had withdrawn from our marriage, missed celebrations, and treated every feeling like a problem to schedule. That part was true. His eyes lowered because he could not deny it. He said he had made me lonely by believing reliability was enough. He said he had used silence whenever emotion made him feel unskilled. The admission was plain and late. It reached the oldest part of me. I pictured noodles in the truck and the spare room lights he rebuilt. For several breaths, I wanted him to ask me to choose him. He did not. He asked me to correct the statement before the closing address. I heard procedure where I wanted love, so I told him he had proved my point. Even after being slapped, he cared more about wording and schedules than fighting for his wife. Annika looked away first. Elias did not. He said fighting for me and protecting me from the results of my choices were no longer the same thing. I left before the corridor could become his room. That afternoon, 2 suppliers cancelled dinner with Damien. One investor moved from our table to Annika's. Maren stopped sending me draft captions and began copying the board office on every revision. I explained each change as temporary panic. Powerful people hated bad photographs. They loved revenue more. Orchard Quay had opened on time. The expansion contract was worth more than one ugly reception. Damien still controlled the division. I still controlled the partnerships attached to it. Sunday would repair the picture. My plan was simple. Before the closing speaker, Damien would praise the summit and announce my promotion. I would acknowledge the incident, describe Elias as emotionally overwhelmed, and ask the audience not to judge Arden Rowe through one private conflict. Calm, mature, generous. Then the room would move on. Sunday morning, Damien approved my speech but changed one line. He wanted me to say Elias had used his marriage to gain access to senior leaders. The claim sounded too sharp even to me. I reminded Damien that Elias had worked on Orchard Quay before the summit. Damien said worked on was not the same as built. He told me not to become confused about who created opportunities for whom. The sentence carried an edge I had heard him use on assistants. For the first time, it touched me. Maren stood near the office door holding 3 programs. She placed them on the desk and said she would not sign the media statement. I asked whether she planned to abandon me after encouraging half the jokes Damien made about Elias. She said she had laughed because being near Damien felt safer than being honest. Then she said safety had become too expensive. Maren left the programs and walked out. I sent 2 messages and called once. She did not respond. Her absence was quiet. That made it harder to punish. Elias came to the office an hour before the closing session. His cheek was still marked. He wore the dark suit again, with a new white shirt and the same worn cuffs. He placed the folded program between us. He asked one final time whether I would tell the room that Damien struck him without cause and that I chose to support it. I said Elias had no right to demand public loyalty after years of private absence. I told him he waited until rooms were formal before saying what mattered because facts were safer to him than feelings. I said he had made me beg for visible love and then judged where I found it. He did not deny any of that. The silence gave my accusation weight. I continued. I said Damien saw my value immediately. Elias needed 12 years and a printed schedule before he could stand beside it. His thumb moved along the cuff seam. He asked whether being seen by Damien was worth helping him strike my husband. I told him husbands did not hide behind titles after provoking stronger men. I said Damien's hand had only delivered the lesson Elias kept refusing. Then I pushed the folded program back toward him. Elias looked at it, not at me. He said he would handle the closing address properly. No threat, no raised voice. He became quieter while I became certain. I told him there would be security near the stage and that any attempt to turn my promotion into his grievance would prove exactly what I had said about him. He put the program inside his jacket. Damien entered as Elias left. The 2 men passed without touching. Damien waited until the door closed, then said my husband finally looked trained. I laughed once. It sounded like Friday, so I chose to hear confidence. The glass house filled by 4. Afternoon light covered the stage in gold. Investors took the front rows. Suppliers sat behind them. The photograph of Damien's hand was already everywhere. People pretended not to look. I wore navy this time. Silver had belonged to the reception. Navy belonged to recovery. Damien spoke first. He praised resilience, partnership, and the ability to continue after distraction. Nobody applauded until he lifted his own hands. Then he introduced me. I walked onto the stage beneath the Arden Row logo. 400 faces, 3 camera lights, 1 empty seat where Maren should have been. I delivered the statement exactly as planned. I called Friday a private misunderstanding. I said Elias had been under professional pressure and had challenged Damien in a way that required a firm response. I described my husband's reaction as part of a longer pattern of resentment toward my success. The room stayed still. So I crossed the line more clearly. I said my husband was a talented repairman who had mistaken access for importance. I said Damien had forced him to understand his place, and sometimes one honest moment was kinder than years of pretending a loser belonged among leaders. Damien smiled from his chair. I smiled back. The promotion announcement did not come. Instead, Annika Rao walked to the center microphone. She thanked me and asked me to remain on stage for the closing partner address. I took that as a gift. Damien adjusted his jacket, preparing to join me. Annika read one name, Elias Barrett. He stood from the second row. The room turned with him. He walked toward the stage without hurry. The red mark remained faintly visible on his cheek. At the steps, he rubbed the seam of his left cuff. Not hesitation, not weakness. The small motion of a man placing every part of himself under control before making a final decision. Elias took the microphone beside me and removed the folded program from his jacket. He opened it to the last page. His name was printed beneath the closing address. Founder and principal engineer, Keystone Civic Systems. Designer of the Orchard Quay Recovery Platform. Lead technical partner for Arden Row Expansion Review. The words had been there inside 400 programs on our living room floor. Annika asked the audience to recognize the company whose system had not merely repaired Orchard Quay, but made the next 6 developments financially possible. Lewis stood near the technical booth. The investors in the front row rose first. Then the suppliers. Applause crossed the room without waiting for Damien. My hand stayed on the edge of the podium. My nails pressed into the wood. Elias did not describe the slap. Everyone had seen it. He did not describe my laugh either. The photograph had already done that work. He spoke about 8 weeks of nights, his 11 employees, and the ownership of the system Damien had called an internal rescue plan. He said Keystone had been prepared to license it across Arden Row's expansion. Then he said trust was part of any long partnership, especially when one side controlled buildings where other people slept. He declined the renewal. That was all. No revenge speech, no insult. One business decision made by the man I had called a repairman. The sponsor page, Luis's greeting, the moved microphone, Annika in the corridor, and Elias's question about Sunday connected without anyone adding a new fact. I had touched every clue. I had moved his logo. I had removed his description. I had helped Damien call his work ours. I tried to take the microphone and explain that Elias was using a marital conflict to damage Arden Row. Annika placed one hand over the microphone switch. She said the expansion review had always depended on Keystone's voluntary renewal and that my own brief had removed the attribution. My explanation reached the room and found no place to sit. Damien stood. He said I had told him Elias was a minor contractor with no authority. Then he moved toward the side stairs, leaving me between the podium and my husband. His first action under pressure was not to protect me. It was to separate his lie from mine. Maren's seat remained empty. Elias handed the program to Annika and walked off the stage before I did. The petition for dissolution arrived on Tuesday with a date for financial disclosure. I moved from our house into a furnished studio above a parking garage. My promotion and annual bonus were withdrawn during the expansion review. Maren stopped answering, and the partners who once requested my table began contacting Annika directly. Damien was suspended from client work and sent one message blaming me for misrepresenting Elias. Arden Row's public project page replaced my Orchard Quay interview with a photograph of Elias standing beside his 11 employees. I had wanted powerful people to see me beside a powerful man. They did. They saw Damien's hand against my husband's face and my mouth open in laughter. Elias had spent years hiding inside work because work never asked him to speak before he was ready. I had spent years demanding a stage because silence reminded me of my father. When the stage finally chose between us, it did not choose the person who wanted it most. The folded gala program still lies in the bottom drawer of my desk. His name was printed on the last page before my boss ever touched his face.